to light fires under those guys. That's just what I'm seeing now. And one new coach that might be interesting to look at that I was thinking about, which is a result of this move, it could be Joel Bouchard. Because a lot of people saw him leaving because Dominic Ducharme got the extension that he wasn't going to get the head coach job, that he might go over to Anaheim, and where he might be able to get a head coach job sooner there. So I don't know. Sebastian probably knows more about the impact that would have on the AHL team. I think he took the whole coaching staff with him there, and that would be interesting to look at.
Yeah, it's a huge turnover in Laval. It's going to be a really interesting season for Laval, but at the same time, I wouldn't really worry because of just how strong their lineup is, right? Like, coaching definitely plays a role in results, but if you have if you look at the Laval Rocket last season, like you have to consider that they were playing in just the Canadian division in the AHL with a lot of teams that were just fairly weak for the AHL. Like the Marlies weren't great, the Belleville Senators weren't great, right? Like it's also just stacking up big results against weaker teams. So if they'd been playing against all AHL teams, the record would not have been nearly as good as it was. However, it's a really strong lineup, right? Like Ryan Poehling might be back. If he is, that's like a phenomenal AHL first line center, and they just bolstered their lineup, right? Like they signed so many established NHL players on AHL deals. Despite the coaching turnover, I'm not worried about Laval. It's going to be a bit of a change from the Joël Bouchard era, and I really did like Bouchard's coaching style. It was fun to watch, but look, we have to give Ul a shot, and with this lineup, it's going to be monumentally difficult to drop the ball.
Yeah, Scott actually joined us earlier, and we recorded a segment that you guys are going to be hearing in a little bit, and we talked exactly about the impact that Jean-François Houle is going to have in Laval, the change of culture, but at the same time, the stacked lineup that the American Hockey League team is going to have. Sebastian, what do you also? Let me just take your take as well on first of all, we also re-signed Alexander Burrows, which I think is an only a positive impact. And I think we've covered quite a bit last week. You know, there was also the Luke Richardson is sticking on board. The one thing that we haven't covered, and we think that it's something that's pretty basic and everything, but if you remember during the course of last season, the Canadiens nominated Sean Burke, director of goaltending. Now, this essentially means that Sean Burke gets to create his own team in order to manage goaltending. I'm not entirely sure if there was an impact last year. I don't necessarily think so, because it was brand new, and there was also the whole COVID issue as well, because Sean Burke was in the United States and he had to go through quarantine and whatnot. But I mean, going further, do you think this will have an absolute impact? Let's focus on the Jake Allen and Carey Price tandem, and what I mean by impact is not necessarily being better performance wise, but would it also mean working smarter as well?
Yeah, like Sean Burke is not going to be a hands-on person in the organization, because basically the way that like the organizational hierarchy is looking now for goaltending is that you have I'm forgetting the names now. I feel really, really bad, but there's like a goalie scout who basically takes care of all like the drafted goalies that aren't playing with Laval or Montreal. So you look at like Jakub Dobeš, you look at Frederick Nissen-Deschaux, you look at, is there anyone else? Anyways, look at the drafted goalie prospects that aren't with the Habs right now.
Yeah.
And then so there's one guy that takes care of them. Then you have the AHL goalie coach that takes care of all the goalies that are in the AHL.
Marco Marciano, yeah.
Thank you, Marciano. And then you have Eric Raymond, who is going to be the Habs goalie coach, who will be working with Carey Price and Jake Allen. So it's going to be a real difference, because we haven't seen this kind of role in Montreal before, of having a director of goaltending who is hands off in that way. So it's going to be interesting to see, and even to look at like what his role even entails. Like I'm not quite sure what he's actually going to do, considering like all these coaches are going to do the hands-on stuff, but like, what are the hands-off stuff of like goalie administration? I have no idea.
I'm not entirely sure myself. And to be fair, I think the Canadians are only the second team in the NHL after the Florida Panthers to institute this kind of coaching in the first place. So I guess it remains to be seen, but it's definitely an interesting approach. And I'm really curious to see if that's actually going to have a positive impact on our goaltending, because Lord knows in a 82 game schedule that we haven't seen in 2 years, and 82 games condensed as well because it's the Olympics next year, like we're going to need those two guys more than healthy and performing. Sebastian and Josh, for the final 60 seconds of this segment, I just wanted to mention this real quickly. I don't know if you guys have been on Twitter or anything today. Have you noticed Austin Matthews getting his 30 seconds of fame and being named once again for the second time in 3 years as the cover athlete for NHL 22? Is come on, guys, this is ridiculous.
I hate this. I
totally hate this. Also,
like, Matthews is my least favorite player in the NHL. Like, he's great to watch on the ice, but like I mean, after his like Austin incident, like, how can you have this guy on the cover? Not even just once, but like twice in 3 years.
They claimed, the EA claimed that he's the future,
he's
and now the game is
guy.
going into the next generation. I don't know. Like, I personally, I would have went with someone like Nathan McKinnon or something. But then again,
or like, there's so many options. You can go with Artemi Panarin. You can go with David Pasternak. You can go with Carey Price. There's so many, like, so many options. EA
has this wonderful habit of picking the wrong players. Like, I don't know if you guys remember. I get that it was like, a mini dynasty and everything, but they had Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews back to back. So it was two Chicago Blackhawks players. The year that PK Subban was dominated was the year he got traded to Nashville. So we had that awkward moment where we're picking up our copy and we have like, oh, he's Nashville. But Josh, I don't know if you're a gamer at all and you want to comment on this, but I mean, I just need to mention this, that it's still pretty hilarious that Austin Matthews will have done the cover of NHL more often than he has played in the second round of the playoffs.
I'm just glad he has something to celebrate this year after that performance in the first round.
Well, we will see. I mean, I've been playing this game since forever, and I don't know. We all know what the comments are. So, like we say en bon québécois, on verra. And now it's my pleasure to send the puck back to Joshua Rosa. Josh is going to be presenting us a new weekly segment called On This Day in Habs History.
On this day in Habs history,
on this day, August 19th, year of our Lord 1988, Canadiens legend Guy Lafleur with the New York Rangers at age 37. He scored 18 goals and 45 points that season, good enough to earn him 2 more with the Nordiques before retiring for good. He became just the second player to play in the NHL after being inducted into the Hall of Fame, first being Gordie Howe and the third being Mario Lemieux in 2000. On the exact same day, August 19th, 1947, the Canadiens traded away Buddy O'Connor and Frank Eddles to the Rangers for Joe Bell, George Robertson, and Hal Lacole. The big name in this is Buddy O'Connor. He scored 60 points in 60 games the year the Montreal Canadiens traded him away. He won the Hart Trophy and the Lady Byng Trophy that year. He went on to be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1988. It was the exact same day and year as, you guessed it, Guy Lafleur.
Outstanding, Josh. Thank you so much for that. And now it is time for everyone's favorite segment, Sebastian High and Scott Cowan, the Prospect Heroes.
the Prospect Heroes Scott and Sebastian on Puck and Roll.
So unfortunately, Scott wasn't able to join us for the recording of this episode, but I have sat down with him nonetheless. Right before our show, we recorded a little segment, and here's his take on how the Laval Rocket roster is shaping up. All right, so Scott, last week we were talking about who can potentially crack the NHL roster. There was obviously a lot of great discussion about guys like Brian Paling, who seems to be a favorite to make the Canadian squad. Other guys like Alex Belzil was mentioned, etc. But now let's maybe take a little focus on the AHL roster as a whole. Let's look at the Rockets. And I mean, there's 1,000,001 new players to begin with. I think 90% of the roster is going to be speaking French in the locker room. But how about we just take a good long look at it and see, in your opinion, are there any players that stand out more than others this season for the Rocket?
Well, I think one of the really nice things about the Laval Rocket this past season is that they've finally gotten to a respectable standard and they finally become a very competitive team in the AHL. Over their first 2 seasons, or should I say 3 seasons, they really struggled and they were kind of in the middle of the pack or dead last in the AHL for those first 3 seasons. So now there's definitely a lot more eyes on them as they've kind of got that Canadian Division title. They have a really talented young roster coming up. And also they signed 14 players to AHL contracts this past offseason, which is a crazy amount, and one that will definitely contribute to the roster really well. Now, in regard to the guys that I think will stand out, as you said, I think Ryan Paling will continue to be the offensive leader for the Rocket. I mean, he's a former first-round pick by the Canadians, 25th overall, and he's sadly just kind of been stuck in the middle of the pack due to Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki coming through the ranks, and he's kind of been brushed to the wayside for the time being. And while I think that Paling isn't nearly as talented as Caulfield or Suzuki by a long shot, I still think he's a really talented player in his own right, and I feel like he's deserving of a chance to prove himself. He definitely did this past season in Laval with 25 points in 28 games after struggling in 2019-20 and being in head coach Joel Bouchard's doghouse for part of the season. And he definitely fits the bill as a kind of Michael McCarron player in Montreal, a guy who isn't really that talented offensively, but is a great defensive player. Leading on from that, or going into the fact of guys who didn't have quite as high of a draft billing, Joel Teasdale and Raphael Harvey-Pinard were obviously 2 of the biggest surprises for the Rocket last season and became really great offensive leaders for the team, in spite of being undrafted players, in spite of having not really much going for them, and in spite of their injury troubles. They still managed to step up and really prove themselves as talented players worth a look. Joel Teasdale obviously caught a lot of people's eyes in his final season with the Rouyn Norada Huskies, where he put up 34 points in 20 games in a Memorial Cup title run. And this past season, Laval had 18 points in 26 games in spite of a broken leg in last season's training camp, causing him to miss the entire 2019-20 season. While he managed to miss the end of this season as well due to injuries, he should be ready for training camp, and he's an incredibly talented player and a very valuable asset to the Rocket.
How about we take a second and talk about Raphael Harvey-Pinard just for 1 second? I mean, he's definitely developed into one of those feel-good stories, I would say. So again, like you mentioned, like he was a 7th-round pick in 2019 for the Canadians. And he's your diminutive winger. He's 5'9", 173 pounds soaking wet. He's a tiny guy, but he seems to come not only. Well, I mean, statistics are statistics. I mean, last season, 9 goals, 11 assists, 20 points in 36 games. And the last year was all over the place, of course. But he still held his own in the queue. But again, the Quebec Junior Major Hockey League is renowned for having outstandingly lavish offensive numbers. But if you look a little bit, I mean, what stood out from me is not only the fact that he's a hard worker, but it seems that the work ethic that he's developed is just in his DNA. A perfect example is if you take his sister, who has been hired by La Presse to be a sports reporter as well, and she said the same thing. It's like, wow, I'm being given a chance to, make a difference in the sports world, the community, etc. So how do you think that work ethic will transpire onto the ice? And I know last week we were talking about how he actually can be a dark horse in order to make the NHL one day. But I mean, at the moment, is he going to be one of those guys that's going to be relied upon for kind of like getting the troops motivated and having maybe semi Brendan Gallagher type role for the Rocket?
I'm gonna make a statement that's kind of maybe a bit more on the obscure side here, but in many ways, Raphael Harvey-Pinard is the Alexandre Alain that never was for the Rocket. Alexandre Alain was one of my favorite players over his first 2 seasons in Laval, but he unfortunately, to his own choices, chose to continue his studies and leave professional hockey rather than continue to play for the Rocket, which was a shame. He was playing really well in 2019-20, and he was actually one of their offensive leaders towards the end of the season. And he definitely brought that work ethic in the same